Welcome into press coverage. I'm Dan Hope, joined by Chase Brown, as we are on the eve of Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas. I'll be heading there in a few hours along with Andy Anders. We will be there all week to provide coverage on the scene in Las Vegas, but got Chase here with me today to preview Big Ten Media Days a little bit and kind of talk about the unofficial start to Media Days, which it's become kind of tradition that even though the Big Ten doesn't put together an official preseason poll, that several media outlets tend to release their preseason polls the day before Big Ten Media Days start. I think there were 3 different preseason polls that dropped on Monday morning, one of which I voted in, which was the Kings of the North preseason poll. Cleveland.com, USA Today doing some preseason polls as well. And all 3 preseason polls agreeing that Penn State is the #1 team in the Big Ten entering 2025. Looking at the Kings of the North poll, Penn State getting 35 of the first place votes, Ohio State getting 18, Oregon getting 1. And so Penn State, a team that you look at kind of the 2 last teams to win the national championship, Michigan and Ohio State. They were teams that brought back a lot of seniors, a lot of guys who could have gone to the NFL draft 1 year earlier, instead came back to try to go chase a championship. It worked for Michigan. It worked for Ohio State. Now Penn State's hoping it'll happen for them. Chase, what do you think?
I think Penn State has its best chance to win the Big Ten in recent memory, certainly. It all comes down to that game in November, I think, when they play Ohio State. That could be a statement game, I think, for Penn State's chances of winning a Big Ten championship this year. They don't need to win it, right, to then go on and win the conference championship. But I think that's kind of the game I'm looking at to determine in my own mind whether I would see Nittany Lions as a legitimate conference championship threat. I still think that Ohio State, even though they haven't won a conference championship in several years now, are still kind of that team sitting on top of the mountain. It's hard to say otherwise when they just won the national championship, but they have a lot of questions of their own with a lot of roster turnover from, as you just said, Dan, a roster that was full of guys who decided to come back instead of going to the NFL, pushing their chips in to try and win a championship. And that's the same exact thing Michigan did 2 years ago. So they have the formula and they have the pieces. It's all a matter of whether or not when they get to those big games, as it's been a knock on James Franklin throughout his career, can he show up in those big games? Can he get his team to show up? And if they do against Ohio State, if they do against Oregon, then I think that they have a wonderful chance to break through this year. I'm still just going to kind of wait and see for those games to see whether or not this team has what it takes to really make a push for that conference championship.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to 2 things for Penn State: James Franklin, Drew Allar. Starting with Drew Allar, does Drew Allar continue to kind of take that next step in his trajectory? I think there was a lot of improvement for Drew Allar from 2023 to 2024. But the one knock on Drew Allar is you look at those big games, whether it was against Ohio State in the regular season, whether it was against Notre Dame in the CFP semis, Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. You look at some of those big games. He hasn't performed at his best on the biggest stages. And so that's something he's going to have to do if you're talking about a Big Ten championship, national championship kind of team at Penn State. And then, as you mentioned, of James Franklin, I mean, the record against, top 10 teams is not good for James Franklin. He's had a tendency, we saw it again last year against Ohio State, against Notre Dame. He's had a tendency to make puzzling decisions in big moments, in big games that have cost the Nittany Lions. And so, those are kind of the 2 things that I look at and say, well, those could be the biggest hurdles for Penn State. Because I think, to me, outside of those 2 factors, I look at Penn State and I think Penn State has the most well-rounded roster in the Big Ten. Not necessarily the most talented. I think Ohio State is still the most talented team in the Big Ten. But I think if you just look in terms of experience, what Penn State has, I mean, you've got an elite running back tandem, I would say the best in the country, and Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Receivers have been the big knock at Penn State in recent years, but I do believe this is the best receiving core they've had in some time. Really reloaded through the transfer portal, bringing in Trevor Pena, Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. They are going to miss Tyler Warren, but I do think that those receivers they brought in can help make up for that. I think their offensive line should be one of, if not the best in the conference. I think their defensive line should be really good with Denai Dennis-Sutton, Zane Durant leading the way there. They've got some experienced linebackers led by Tony Rojas. They've got a really talented secondary led by A.J. Harris at corner. So I think all the pieces are there. And honestly, the questions around Penn State are kind of similar to what the questions were around Ohio State a year ago. It was, can the coach win on the biggest stage? Because that was a big question. It was a big question at the end of November. And then, in the CFP, he proved it. But there was that question of Ryan Day going into last year. And it was, is the quarterback going to be at that championship caliber level? Because to me, I look at Drew Allar, and maybe Drew Allar's NFL draft stock's a lot higher than Will Howard's was a year ago, but I kind of look at him in a similar way to how I looked at Will Howard a year ago. I think he's good, probably one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten, but is he that quarterback who can elevate Penn State and win in the biggest games of the season? That's what I don't know yet. I think having a better receivers core is going to help him. But, as I've said all along, I mean, or at least I've told you, Chase, and others on our staff, I've been pretty bullish on Penn State this offseason, as I do think Penn State is a team that can compete for a national championship this year. And so I did put Penn State at number 1 on my ballot. I put Ohio State number 2. I haven't done my full prediction of a season yet, but I would say if I'm sitting here right now, I think Ohio State beats Penn State in the regular season at the shoe, Jim Knowles revenge game, all that. But I think they rematch in Indianapolis, and I think Penn State wins there. That's just where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at their schedule right now. You have 3 non-conference games you would expect them to win against Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. And then outside of the Ohio State game on the road, every other game that's important and marquee is at home. They have Oregon at home at night, which is very important to note. They finally get their night game for a marquee opponent, a whiteout. But then they are also hosting Indiana. They're hosting Nebraska. The only road game really that could be a test is Kinnick. They go to Iowa a week before the Ohio State game. So you could potentially build up some sort of trap game narrative there for an Iowa team that always plays better at home, for an Iowa crowd that always brings it. But, you look at their schedule, even if they lose that regular season game to Ohio State, you would expect them to at least have a shot at the Big Ten championship, at least giving themselves a puncher's chance. And if they do get into a game on a neutral site, that's a place where anything can happen. And I do think that there is a lot of optimism for that team this year. And I do think that there's plenty of things to be excited about for what they bring back from a roster and talent perspective.
Look a little further down the Big Ten preseason poll, as mentioned, Oregon getting that one other first place vote. Now, another team that we've talked about off air that I'm pretty bullish on this year is Illinois. I think Illinois, much like Penn State, a team that brings back a lot of players from last year, a very experienced team, a team that won 10 games last year under Brett Bielema. I think this is a team that's been trending in the right direction pretty steadily here under Brett Bielema. And I think this year, it's set up for Illinois to, in my mind, potentially be the Indiana of the Big Ten this year. And that, you compare them to Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State, even Michigan, maybe even the USC on paper, they don't have the same kind of blue chip talent. But I think the roster that they've built, the experience that they've built, I think gives them a chance to be a CFP team this year. Especially, again, you look at their schedule, they've got that game against Ohio State in the middle of the season. That's their toughest game. Every other game on that schedule looks very winnable. I think probably the 2 games it comes down to are they play Indiana on the road, they play Washington on the road. I think it probably comes down to those 2 games. If they can win those 2 games, I would really like Illinois' chances at potentially being a college football playoff team this year. What do you think about Illinois and about kind of those Big Ten preseason rankings in general?
Absolutely. I'm right there with you, Dan. I mean, just looking at the way that their schedule shook out, as you mentioned, Indiana, they have a home game against USC the next week. But then you look at the other opponents, it's Purdue, it's Rutgers, it's Maryland, it's Northwestern. And if you look at Doug's preseason poll, those are the 4 bottom teams. You would expect them not only to beat those opponents, but beat them pretty heavily and also be able to rest their starters, most likely in those games, keeping them fresh all year long, keeping them ready for those kinds of big matchups against an Ohio State, a USC, and Indiana, and a Washington. So, I do think that this team, I look forward a lot to the Ohio State game when they play Ohio State, because I do think that it's probably going to be the biggest game on Illinois' campus in a long, long time, because Brett Bielema, has that program relevant. And I don't think that he expects to let Ohio State come in there and walk away with a comfortable win. I think he's going to have anything that he can plan and everything that he could throw at Ohio State that weekend is going to be thrown. And I do think that's going to be really entertaining.
Very, very real chance that Illinois could be 6-0 going into that game. And if that's the case, that's going to be a very anticipated game. My first time going to Champaign, the only time I've been to Champaign was 2020. I got there, and literally 15 minutes after I got to my hotel, the game was canceled because of COVID-19. So
wow,
I've walked around the stadium, but I of all the traditional Big Ten teams, that's the one team that somehow I have not yet seen a game there. So looking forward to that one for sure, especially because I think Illinois is going to be quite good this year. Quick look through that full predicted order of finish, as mentioned: Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon, Illinois, the top 4. Michigan coming in at number 5. Indiana, 6. USC, 7. Nebraska, 8. Iowa, 9. Washington, 10. Minnesota, 11. Wisconsin, 12. Michigan State, 13. UCLA, 14. And then, as you mentioned, Rutgers, Maryland, Northwestern, Purdue, rounding out the bottom 4. Outside of that top group of teams, Chase, is there any other team that you're looking at in the Big Ten this year as kind of a candidate to maybe play spoiler, to maybe be – I mentioned Illinois as last year's Indiana in the terms of making a CFP run, but, I mean, this poll last year, I have to look back. I think Indiana was at or very close to the bottom on this poll last year, and they ended up making the CFP. So is there a team that you look at as a sleeper that's not getting a lot of preseason love that you think could end up being a contender in the conference this year?
If I had to pick one, I would maybe say UCLA with some of the changes that they've made. I haven't looked at their schedule. Honestly, as you were asking me that question, Dan, I was fixated on Wisconsin's schedule. I think Wisconsin is ranked far too high on this list personally. I was just looking at their schedule, right? You see Alabama's in the non-conference. That's not going to affect their Big Ten standing. But then they have Michigan on the road. They have Ohio State. They have Oregon. They have Washington. They have Illinois. They have Indiana. They have Iowa. You keep going down the line. You're like, man, Luke Fickell might be in trouble. He might be in trouble this year, depending on how this season shakes out. But yeah, if I had to pick one, UCLA with Nico Iamaleava. I tried. I didn't say it with much confidence, so that's my issue right there. If I would have said it confidently, I think you would have got me. But he comes from Tennessee, all that offseason controversy. I can't say that I was particularly high on him, just as terms of what he produced at Tennessee with the talent that roster had. And seeing how he performed against Ohio State in not so favorable conditions for a Tennessee fan in the cold, a Tennessee team. But if he's able to provide a spark for UCLA, maybe they're a team that rises the ranks. I think Washington with Jed Fish, he's a good coach. Him coming over from Arizona a few years ago, I do think that he has the potential to lead that team to some wins. And maybe they knock off a couple of opponents that maybe they wouldn't, or maybe they should. So Washington's a team that could maybe rise the ranks here too, maybe.
Yeah, Washington was going to be my pick. I think I took you guys a little bit of back today when I released my preseason All Big Ten team and I put DeMond Williams Jr. as my quarterback. And I'll admit that's a little bit of a dart throw, a little bit of a bold prediction there, but a guy who was really, really good when he took over as the starting quarterback for Washington in the last couple of games of last year. He did take a lot of sacks, so he's got to work on that. But you talk about a guy who completed over 80% of his passes in both those games, also purportedly has 4.3 40-yard dash speed. So he's a player I'm really excited to watch. Like he's a guy you talk about a potential like breakout star in the Big Ten. I think he's a name that I'm watching very closely is DeMond Williams Jr. I think if he lives up to the hype, that Washington offense could be a very fun offense to watch because they got a really good running back in Jonah Coleman. They got a very good receiving core as well, led by Denzel Boston. I look at Washington, I think they're probably going to be a team. I think they're probably going to be dynamic offensively. Are they going to be like a 10-win team? I don't know. I think they're still going to have some holes, but I think they're going to be one of those teams that's going to be fun to watch. And I do look at them. You look at they've got fairly challenging schedule, I think, but you look at some of the teams they play: Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois, Oregon. Like those are 4 tough games, but could I see Washington winning one of those games or even 2 of those games and playing spoiler? I definitely don't rule it out. I think that they've got the talent, and I think they're going to be better than they were a year ago, to where I think they can make some noise in the Big Ten this year. UCLA, I think, as well. You talk about some of the most interesting teams in the Big Ten. I think UCLA is certainly a far more interesting team than it was a year ago. I don't necessarily think they're going to be a good team, but I do think they're certainly going to be interesting because of Nico. I certainly hope Deshaun Foster's press conference this week goes better than it did a year ago. I think that's the first hurdle for UCLA this week is Deshaun Foster not looking like a deer in the headlights at the podium and, maybe having a little fun with the we're in LA and USC is too thing. I know that he had some fun with it after. Hopefully we can all have some fun with that this week when they speak on Thursday. Going back to Wisconsin as well. Yeah, man. I mean, this is the second year in a row where I've looked at Wisconsin's schedule and thought, man, like they got a tough draw. It's like, I feel for Luke. I honestly do. Cause I think Luke Fickell is a good coach, but I don't think that schedule is set up well for him to succeed this year. I mean, having to go on the road to Alabama, Michigan, Oregon, and Indiana, also having Ohio State, Washington, and Illinois on that schedule, and Iowa on that schedule. I mean, you're looking at really, I look at that schedule and I say, you got Miami, you got Middle Tennessee, you got Maryland. Those are 3 games I'm confident Wisconsin will win. Other than that, like every game of that schedule is tough. So, he's got his work cut out for him. You'd have to think that, they've got to go above 500 or you're going to have conversations about a coaching change there. And I do think he's got his work cut out for him. So it'd be an interesting team to watch this year. But yeah, I don't have a lot of optimism in what this season's going to look like for Wisconsin because I think the schedule czar or whatever has not been particularly kind to them. I think for the second year in a row, Wisconsin's gotten a really tough draw, and we'll see if that's something that they are ultimately able to overcome. Zooming out now to kind of the bigger picture storylines here of Big Ten Media Days coming up this week. Certainly one storyline that I think got some added juice on Monday morning came when ESPN's Dan Wetzel reported that Tony Petitti sent a letter to the NCAA calling for Michigan not to receive any additional punishments for its sign stealing scandal. And that certainly is a different tone from the commissioner than we saw when this scandal first broke in 2023, where, he made it clear that he felt like Michigan did deserve to be punished for its actions, impermissible in-person scouting and whatnot. Now he seems to be taking the stance of, okay, it's time to move on. And that stance is certainly not going to make him friends with Ohio State fans, is it, Chase?
No. I'm looking at what we currently have at the time of our recording, 192 comments on this piece that was written about 5 or 6 hours ago. And I don't even want to count the number of comments we'll see on our Twitter X or our Facebook. But, it's one of those things that he'll have to answer for tomorrow as he kicks off the Big Ten Media Days, or Tuesday. And just the opportunity that this presents, I think, for maybe Michigan to take back some ground a little bit in the narrative. It seems like anyone other than a Michigan fan has been against Michigan. And I'm not saying that people aren't going to entirely forget about what they've done, but it kind of moves the target a little bit. It kind of resets the stance, and you're kind of now looking at Tony Petitti as like, how could you do this? How could you be the person that stands up and speaks for them? So it's taking a little bit of the heat off of the Wolverines, and I do think that this could be a talking point throughout the entire week. It's certainly something that Sharon Moore will also talk about as well, I'm sure, during his availabilities. I'm sure Ryan Day will be asked about it as well. He'll probably have some response of it being no comment, or he's not something he wants to get into right now. But yeah, it's definitely interesting timing for it to come out the day before Big Ten Media Days start. It creates a narrative going in, though, that's juicy. It's definitely full of some entertaining possibilities to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I think, we were talking earlier, and you and Garrett kind of made the point about, did Michigan leak this kind of to try to get, set it up for Tony Petitti to defend them publicly on Tuesday? I don't think Tony Petitti would have wanted us out there, because I think Tony Petitti would probably prefer to get through that press conference without having to talk about this situation. But like you said, with this coming out now, I think it's guaranteed that he's going to have to talk about this situation on Tuesday. And, it's one of those things I'm sure, people who aren't Ohio State fans or people who are Michigan fans are like, shouldn't we move on by now? Well, we can't move on until the NCAA does something. So, we're all still kind of in this holding pattern. And that's why, for, another year, this is going to be a storyline at Big Ten Media Days. Maybe not as much of a storyline as it was a year ago, but it's certainly still going to be a storyline. Like you said, I don't expect Ryan Day to get into it. I think, especially you look at the way everything went, both good and bad for Ryan Day last year, both with losing to Michigan again and then going on to win a national championship. He has no reason to wade into those waters at this point. I'm sure he's going to take all his focuses on Ohio State and preseason camp, getting ready for that season opener against Texas, but certainly will be a talking point, especially on Thursday when Sharon Moore and the Michigan players have their day with the media. Going back to Ryan Day and the Buckeyes, they will meet with the media on Tuesday. Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, Sonny Styles, Ohio State's player representatives. I think we would both agree the three obvious and ideal representatives for Ohio State in this setting, particularly, we've talked about it before, if Big Ten Media Days, it is, even though, the Ohio State beat's going to fly out to Vegas to go cover this event, the Ohio State players who were there, it's not really about us. This is more about conference and nationwide media getting their chance to talk to these guys, because we're going to talk to Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, and Sonny Styles a lot throughout the season. We're obviously going to talk to Ryan Day a lot throughout the year. This is kind of more about national writers and regional writers from other team getting some access to these guys. And so certainly having by far your two biggest stars in Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, who were both picked overwhelmingly as the Big Ten offensive and defensive player of the year in the preseason poll. Certainly, they got my votes as well. Would have been hard to pick anybody else there. And then Sonny Styles, I think we both agree, very, very likely to be wearing the block O for Ohio State this year. Just seems like the clear-cut choice to be that guy this year, a guy who's going to be a captain, who's going to be a leader of the defense. So I think the three guys that are, very obvious that you would want representing Ohio State in this setting. I'll ask you, Chase, anything you're anticipating tomorrow, anything that you're interested to hear players or Ryan Day get asked about that they might talk about, kind of what's front of mind for you?
I am anticipating a flurry of images on my social media timelines of some player from another school. It looks like, actually, this would be pretty funny. It looks like Kurt Signetti is going to be speaking at a podium at the same exact time as Ohio State student athletes. So I'm assuming that there's going to be a picture of somebody looking at Kurt Signetti, and behind him, Kurt Signetti is going to be looking at a wave of people, 9, 10, 11, 12 people deep, waiting to talk to Jeremiah Smith and get their questions in. It is amazing, Dan, because over the years, we haven't necessarily seen a lot of underclassmen take the podium for Ohio State. You can correct me, there might not have been one, actually,
I don't
because
think so. I can't remember
Ohio
one.
State's always been in a quarterback competition, seemingly, for the past few years. So the only person I could have thought of would maybe be a CJ Stroud, but by the time he was named the starter, it was August. So he wouldn't have been there. And the future quarterbacks, same for them. So it's fascinating that he is going to be a sophomore, Jeremiah Smith, and he is going to be one of the most sought after people at this event. And so I'm excited to see how he uses that platform. He's somebody that has he doesn't have the most tame tongue. He is not afraid to call his shot when it comes to being confident, whether it was him calling out Oregon. He certainly made his shot talking about Michigan this offseason and saying he doesn't plan to lose to them, the next 2 years. I'm sure Ohio State wasn't thrilled about him making that comment, but also, if anyone's going to say it, it's him. He has the platform to do it. He has the skill and the talent to do it. So I'm excited to see how he uses that platform, where there will be a lot of people around him, a lot of people with microphones, a lot of people with video cameras. What will the questions be like? What will the answers be like? And I do think that Caleb Downs and Sonny Styles are cut from the same cloth a little bit. They're kind of all business, all profession. So I do think that Jeremiah might be the person that you can look to for a little bit of a spicy commentary on how things are going.
Yeah, you said one of the most sought after. I mean, you can probably remove a one of, I think, at least in terms of players. I think Jeremiah Smith will draw the biggest crowd of any player. I mean, every guy I'd probably put in there just because of way things went down this offseason would be Nico Iamaleava. But he's like at the very end of the last day. So I think that will get people to stick around to talk to Nico, but there's also going to be people who have left by the time that Nico gets to the podium. And so I expect Jeremiah to draw the biggest crowd of any player, and I'm not sure it'll be particularly close. I mean, I think even Caleb Downs might have like a tame podium for a player of his caliber just because he's going at the same time as Jeremiah. And Caleb's a star too, but Jeremiah, like you said, for one, like he's got that swagger about him. Like it's like he's not going to say anything like stupid, but he is the most likely of those three to make a couple comments that end up on all the graphics all over social media that are kind of a quote people take away from the day. Caleb and Sonny are not prone to saying anything controversial. So I do think it's most likely that Jeremiah is going to be the guy who has the biggest soundbite of the day. Not that Jeremiah is like a huge talker, but he does have that confidence, and he's a guy, he knows how good he is, and he backs it up with his play on the field. And so, like you said, if anybody's going to make comments like that, he's the guy to do it. So yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see just like the circus around him. He already has a lot of experience handling the circus, so he'll be just fine. But it's certainly going to be it's certainly going to be interesting to see it in this setting, in Las Vegas, people from all over, how, what that spectacle is like for Jeremiah. I'll certainly be interested to see how all of that goes down. And, along with, with Caleb, with Sonny, and then, of course, Ryan Day. I'm sure we'll talk about a wide variety of topics. It's interesting because it's been, and this is a good thing, frankly, if you're Ohio State, it's been kind of a quiet offseason where like there's not a lot of times between like the last time we've talked to him in the spring and now there's like a lot of like new stuff to like ask about. I don't know how much of that there really is this year. Like, obviously kind of one of the big storylines lately has been a lot of recruiting and how they're managing NIL and all that, but he's only going to be able to say so much about that because of the fact that he can't talk about specific recruits. I'm sure that he will give some thoughts on, how revenue sharing is going so far, changes that maybe need to be made at the system. He's gotten more and more vocal over the years about those kind of things. So it'll be interesting to see, how much he maybe decides to take a stand against some certain things that maybe bother him with college football right now. Like you said, don't expect him to make any stand against Michigan or wade into those waters. But, the other thing with Ryan Day is this is going to be probably the least pressure he's felt in this setting in some time, because he's still going to get asked about Michigan, and there's going to be plenty of Michigan reporters there to ask him about Michigan, but he also just won a natty. So, I remember last year, I remember running into Ryan Day right before Ohio State was about to leave, and he made a comment about how many questions he had gotten about expectations. That's what it was last year. It was all about expectations. And I'm sure there's going to be some of those questions this year too, but it's a little bit of a different vibe this year. I think everybody kind of looked at last year was the make or break year. Last year with that roster, you had to go do it. Now this year, it's about trying to repeat, and that's the goal. And there's going to be a lot of those questions asked, but I think the vibe will be a little bit different just because of the fact that he has won a national championship now, that he's proven he can do it. That doesn't lower the goals or the expectations for this year, but he's proven that he can accomplish the highest goal in the sport, and that's going to make him a unique guy at this Big Ten Media Days, because unless I'm forgetting somebody, he's going to be the only coach there that's won a national championship. So when you've done that, it'll allow him to have a little bit of swagger. But he's the guy who's won a national championship, and now he kind of goes from, at this time a year ago, was you better win or you're going to get fired, to now the job's secure. You've proven it. Now it's about keeping that train rolling.
Yeah, right. And I think there was sort of this idea with whoever it was going to be, the first time head coach winning a national championship this past season. If it wasn't going to be Kirby Smart, it was all going to be coaches that had never won a national championship before. So whether it was Ryan Day or Marcus Freeman or James Franklin, the list goes on. Whoever was going to win the national championship was going to be elevated to this certain status next to Kirby Smart, next to Dabo Swinney, as some of the more prominent voices in college football. And I'm thinking, Dan, about an article that Adam Rittenberg, ESPN, wrote earlier this summer about Ryan Day advocating for the Big Ten to have 4 automatic qualifier spots in the future CFP model. So I'll be curious to see if Day has any comments about the future of college football, particularly with its postseason. Maybe someone will ask him about the future of conference championship games and their place in the sport as it continues to evolve, and things of that nature, to get his comments on a more widespread, more zoomed out view of college football and its future. I also think, too, with Ryan Day, you get somebody who is always kind of working on the books, not really off them, not really working in the background. There was one thing that interested me last year, Dan, was I believe it was Cleveland.com got that comment from Ross Bjork, who didn't take a podium spot, but they asked him about the cost of Ohio State's roster. That's when Ross Bjork said that Ohio State's roster was probably costing around $20 million. And that's the number everybody pointed to for the rest of the season. They were like, Ohio State's roster cost them $20 million. Will there be any comments like that we see, or will pretty much everybody be locked down? If they're not in front of the podium, in front of a microphone, they're not talking to anybody. So I'll be curious if anything like that comes out from this week too. Because now you have an event that national reporters are coming to, that local reporters are coming to, as you're saying. But it definitely is a statement that it's in Las Vegas and not in Indianapolis. I think that change in venue kind of bumps this event's prominence to me a little bit.
Yeah, they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but what happens at Big Ten Media Days, that you say something and it can spread like wildfire. Lane Kiffin will be sitting on X getting ready to retweet, anything that he thinks makes anybody else not look as good as Ole Miss in his mind. So it'll be a fun week for sure. Looking forward to getting there. Looking forward to covering it. We'll have a lot more to come on 11 Warriors YouTube channel all week long. Andy Anders and I will be recording videos, each day of Big Ten Media Days from Mandalay Bay. And we'll have, of course, interview videos with Ryan Day, Ohio State players. A lot more coming on 11 Warriors YouTube channel and 11warriors.com all week long. So we hope you stay locked in with us for Big Ten Media Days coverage. For now, he's Chase Brown. I'm Dan Hope. Thanks for joining us.